Imagine walking into a cloister at midnight. The air is cold, heavy with wax and silence, when a scribe's quill scratches across parchment. He is not recording prayers but confessions, words that no nun ever wished to see preserved. A phrase lingers in the echo, improper familiarity between sisters. In that moment, the sacred vow of chastity fractures. Behind walls meant to protect holiness, whispers of desire surface, threatening to shame the entire convent. The prioress must choose: expose her community to the bishop's court or bury the secret within stone walls, sealed by punishment and silence. What happens next is not just a matter of faith. It is a battle between human longing and institutional control. A story the church tried to erase, but the archives refused to forget. To understand the weight of that whispered confession, you must step into the world of a convent in the 14th century. Europe was reshaped by papal decrees, none more restrictive than Pope Boniface VIII's Periculoso of 1298, which demanded absolute enclosure for every nun. The walls of a cloister were not merely stone. They were a second skin meant to shield the women inside from temptation and shield the outside world from scandal. The rules pressed upon these women were relentless: silence at meals, doors locked at dusk, dormitories supervised, visitors allowed only through a grille, with witnesses present. And above all, the vow of chastity, which bound not only the body but even the imagination. Every gesture, every friendship, even every glance, risked being read as sin. Why so harsh? Reputation was fragile currency. A single rumor could cost a convent its donors, its land, even its survival. To prevent such collapse, bishops dispatched inspectors' episcopal visitations where each nun could be questioned, and every suspicion was inked into parchment. The prioress herself held daily court through the chapter of faults, where sisters confessed even the faintest slip, and punishments were imposed before the entire community. Yet it is precisely in these records, written to preserve discipline, that we glimpse the cracks in the wall. Euphemisms like suspect conversation or improper familiarity reveal moments when desire refused to vanish. Behind the rigid rules, there were still embraces, stolen words in the dormitory, or the simple human need for comfort. The paradox is inescapable. The more tightly the rules were drawn, the more precious and dangerous each breach became. And so the archives whisper not of saints untouched by flesh, but of women who lived with longing pressed hard against stone. The night was supposed to be silent. The dormitory, long and narrow, lay in shadows, broken only by the faint glow of an oil lamp. Yet footsteps stirred. A lay sister, tasked with keeping watch, noticed movement where there should have been stillness. Two beds pressed closer than usual, blankets shifted, whispers threaded through the air. She reported it at dawn, and by evening, the prioress held the missing keys from the grille in her hand. The accusation was not shouted, it was written. In careful, controlled Latin, the scribe described suspicious familiarity between sisters, discovered after curfew. No detail, no flesh, no passion, just an elegant cloak of words. But every nun who heard them knew what they implied. The convent was small, its walls amplifying rumor like thunder. For the two sisters named, there would be no hiding. Their intimacy had been dragged into the open, and now the community held its breath, waiting to see how the prioress would judge. And so the blood ran cold. A whisper of desire had transformed into a threat against the entire house. At sunrise, the chapter house filled. The benches creaked as each nun took her place, heads bowed, habits rustling like dry leaves. In the center stood the accused, eyes lowered, cheeks flushed with something between shame and defiance. The prioress read the charge aloud, her voice trembling just enough to betray the weight of what lay before her. Discipline in such matters was both precise and cruel. Punishments ranged from fasting on bread and water to exclusion from choir to the stripping away of privileges like wearing the veil. Some sisters had been confined in their cells for weeks, forced to sleep on bare boards. Others had been transferred to distant houses, severed from friendships that had sustained them. But what punishment fit this sin? To appeal to the bishop's court meant public scandal, ink on diocesan rolls for all to read. To silence it within the cloister risked whispers that discipline was lax, that desire was allowed to fester unchecked. As the prioress spoke, the chapter house seemed to sweat with tension. The accused nuns did not deny their closeness. How could they? Loneliness was a gnawing hunger. Spiritual friendships often blurred into tenderness. Warmth in winter nights was sometimes found in arms, not their own. Yet to admit this aloud was to invite ruin. The prioress paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembly. Every sister felt the decision press against her chest. Was mercy more dangerous than judgment? Could silence itself become the gravest sin? The verdict came not in thunder, but in parchment. The record would note that the sisters performed penance, fasting, extra prayers, exclusion from certain duties. No names would be sent to the bishop. Officially, the scandal was resolved, peace restored. But the air inside the convent changed. Watchfulness replaced ease. Friendships were eyed with suspicion. The dormitory doors were locked tighter, the grille in the parlor reinforced. Every whisper now carried the echo of that accusation. For the accused, life became a vigil. One was reassigned to the kitchen, always under another's gaze. The other kept from the choir, her voice absent in the psalms that once carried her. They were not expelled, but they were marked silent reminders of how desire could be punished without ever being named. And yet, between the lines of the scribe's neat Latin, another truth survives. The punishment was never meant to erase what happened, only to bury it under layers of obedience. The parchment dried, the record sealed, but the longing that had breached the silence, that lingered in memory, in the dark corners of stone cells, in the very walls themselves. The blood froze not because the scandal was dead, but because it was preserved, locked in ink, suspended in secrecy, waiting centuries for us to read between the lines. The story, preserved in those neat lines of Latin, tells us less about the nuns themselves than about the world that judged them. Medieval visitation records rarely wrote openly of desire. Instead, they cloaked transgression in a language of euphemism, suspect conversation, improper familiarity, dangerous affection. The choice of words was deliberate. Bishops and scribes sought to control not only behavior, but memory itself, ensuring that what was written could never be quoted as scandal, only as discipline. Papal decrees like Periculoso demanded complete enclosure, doors locked, grilles reinforced, every contact with the outside world monitored. It was a policy born of fear that the convents, reliant on donations and patronage, might lose credibility if even the hint of sexual misconduct escaped their walls. The rules, meant to preserve purity, created a suffocating space where every gesture carried suspicion. Yet the records betray the truth they tried to suppress. Why would scribes repeatedly note, suspect intimacy, if no such intimacy existed? Why codify penances for carnal contact if confessors never heard such sins? Even as the language avoided detail, its very presence is proof that longing did not vanish at the cloister gate. Confessors' manuals from the period reveal the standard remedies: fasting, scourging, exclusion from the choir, even public humiliation within the convent. These were not merely punishments, but acts of erasure, designed to reabsorb the nun into the rhythm of obedience. Yet, by punishing, the records preserved. Centuries later, we can still read between their lines and sense the human warmth that the institution tried to deny. What emerges is not a tale of wanton scandal, nor of perfect chastity. but of the inescapable tension between human need and institutional control. The convent was both sanctuary and prison, a place where women exercised real authority as abbesses and prioresses, yet lived under rules that sought to silence their most basic impulses. In this silence, desire became both invisible and unforgettable, a secret that history itself could never quite erase. Here lies the paradox. The very decree meant to preserve sanctity ended up magnifying sin. By walling nuns away from the world, the Church created an echo chamber where longing could not disperse, only coiled tighter, pressed against silence. The cloister was imagined as a fortress of purity, but in truth, it became a crucible where every glance, every touch, every whispered word carried the weight of forbidden fire. And yet, within those same walls, authority was reborn. Abbesses governed estates, oversaw finances, and enforced discipline with the gravity of judges. Desire was punished, yes, but the act of punishment also confirmed their power. In trying to contain women, the Church had, paradoxically, given them the tools to police and to rule. That is the cruel irony history leaves us. The cloister promised holiness, but what it produced was secrecy. And in a world ruled by silence, desire found a grammar of glances. When the parchment dried and the ink faded, the official record declared peace restored. But peace in the archives does not mean peace in the soul. What remains is a tension we can still feel, a life lived under rules so strict that even friendship could become suspect, a world where longing was punished yet never erased. The convent walls stand today as ruins or museums, their stones silent but heavy with memory. Walk those cloisters, and you may sense it, the weight of unshed tears, the press of secrets never spoken aloud. Each echo of footsteps on cold flagstones is a reminder that history records obedience, but what survives in whispers is desire. To read these documents is to hear the voices that were never supposed to be heard. Women whose humanity was bound in vows, yet whose hearts still beat against the cage of silence. Their confessions may have been buried in euphemism, but their existence remains undeniable. In the end, hidden history teaches us this. Institutions can command bodies, but never fully extinguish longing. If this hidden history unsettled you, remember, it is only one secret among thousands still pressed between parchment lines and cloister walls. The medieval world was far stranger, darker, and more human than the stories we are usually told. Stay with us as we keep opening doors long kept shut, revealing the desires, betrayals, and silences that history tried to bury. Subscribe and follow the whispers time could not erase.